This is your guy checking in. We are out here beach side, enjoying the breeze and the waves. This is, of course, our favorite spot where we like to go to and hang out and relax. So we are out here today. I'm doing something different. Whoa! I'm doing something different. I have the headphones on today, so I don't know if you guys can hear me or not. I don't have anybody on here yet. So when or if people show up, if y'all can't hear me, let me know because I would hate to do a whole live video with nobody being able to hear me. But if that is the case, I'll just go ahead and go on back and do it again. But we're out here, we're relaxing right now. West Africa at our favorite beach spot. So we are out here. The kids are over here swimming. So in a safe spot, we're not out here in danger, swimming in a safe spot. But I wanted to get on here and talk about something that one of the listeners had brought up the other day. Wow, that was interesting. I just saw a crab down there, and it was being swept away by a current, and it grabbed the sand and dug down into the sand. So you guys be careful if you come to West Africa and are on this beach. There are crabs in the sand. Let's just take a quick look. But there was a question the other day, and I'll just let you guys see down here. You may be able to see some of the wildlife out here. I don't see anything right now. But a question that was asked the other day was, if Elohim made the Bible and gave it to the world, why did he allow for it to be tampered with, right? Why did he allow it to be changed? Why is it different from the word which we received, by the hand of, by the word of, by the mouth of Elohim and by the hand of the scribe from the word of the prophets, right? Why would he allow that to be tampered with? Being almighty, all-knowing, and all-powerful, why would he allow his word to be questioned, right? Or to be tampered with? And I don't want to say corrupted because it's not corrupted, it's tampered with, right? And either way is a very good question. We tend to think of the King James Bible in Christianity as being the unadulterated word of Elohim that is good for reproof and for knowledge, like the scripture says, right? The word is good for reproof and knowledge and teaching of all wisdom, right? These are things that we know. So if this is the case, why then are there mistakes, or not mistakes, but why then are there changes, deliberate changes that affect the worship style? And there are deliberate changes in the text that affect the worship style. So you cannot worship correctly with just the King James Bible that we have now. It is not enough for you to worship correctly because it has been encoded. And we talked about how it was encoded the other day, but I'm going to go back over it here so that we'll have a fresh understanding, just in case you guys or some particular people hadn't seen that other video. So the Bible is encoded three ways, and I'll discuss those three ways really quickly. The first way that it is encoded is in the New Testament. The Bible is encoded for antinomianism, which means lawlessness, right? So we know the Apostle Paul has a history of preaching what sounds like a anti-legalism doctrine. That's just the best way that you can describe it, because that's the way that Christianity historically has described it. That Paul was against legalism, and what is described, and legalism is described by a strict and unwavering adherence to the law of Elohim. We know that going back 1,400 years before our time, the Israelites were severely punished for not keeping strict adherence to the law, right? And so with this being said, 1,400 years later, now Paul is saying, okay, you that seek to be justified by the law, have ye not heard the law, right? So when we understand what Paul is saying, we have to really come to the conclusion based on, Romans chapter 2 and then Romans chapter 3 as well, that Paul is not preaching antinomianism. He is actually preaching reconciliation. And in 2 Corinthians, I can't remember what chapter this is, but he goes into the term of reconciliation, how both Jews and Gentiles needed to be reconciled to Elohim because of the sins of both parties, right? But we know that in the script, in Romans chapter 3, verse 1, it says, do we make void the law through faith? Elohim forbid, yea, we establish the law. So we know there that the law is not done away with, that Paul is not teaching an antinomian doctrine. An antinomian means against the law. But he's not teaching that style of doctrine, that he is being interpreted that way. And it's easy to interpret it that way because in even the first century, some of Paul's Hebrew brethren also assumed that he was preaching an antinomian doctrine and got on to him for that. We know in Acts 21, he took a vow saying that he upholds and keeps the law to the fullest extent. So, there are two ways to understand it. One is that Paul is doing away with the law, and the other is that he's not. And by his own words, he's not. But in order to preach reconciliation, he's had to do things and approach the text from new eyes, right? Scripture says in Acts chapter 15 that the Israelites could not keep the whole law in the wilderness, right? So we know that that the people that are from Gentile nations are also going to have a hard time keeping the law all at once. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm just kind of walking on these rocks here and finding me a nice cool spot to finish talking to you guys. So we know, according to Acts 15, that, and of course all of the Torah, that the Israelites did not keep the law themselves. They had a hard time keeping the law. And this means then, especially when it was first introduced, this means that, a stair-step approach to keeping the law, is indicated. Even James, the leader of the Jerusalem church, gave 4 laws out of the Torah for the brand new converts to keep. And besides that, he also mentioned that they would be going to Sabbath every week, so they wouldn't have to teach the fullness of the law. They could teach these 4 laws to stay away from being strangled, to stay away from fornication, stay away from blood, and to stay away from idols. He said, as long as you do these things, you do well. But notice that James didn't mention keeping the Sabbath. He didn't mention the feast days or anything like that. But he meant the feast days because, again, in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul says, let us keep the feast. And he's speaking to the Corinthian congregation, which, of course, is a mixture of Jews and Gentiles, which then, of course, means that they would be keeping the feast, right? So this is the law. This is the life what Paul is, you guys, what Paul is saying is that the lifestyle of Messiah is a law-keeping lifestyle. And so you really would not need to go over the law every day. You would just need to be living that lifestyle. And as long as you were in the presence of people that were living the lifestyle with you, you would be instructed daily on how and what to do to maintain righteousness. And this is what Paul's responsibility was. However, the King James Bible, what it does is it takes the concept of lawlessness and it corroborates it with the translation. It uses words that make the text seem more antinomian than it already is. You see what I'm saying? And it's not antinomian, we know that. But in order to bring in the Gentiles into the understanding fully, there are some things that Paul does concede to. Like if a person was going to a friend's house and he wasn't sure if the meat that he was eating, was sacrificed to an idol or not. This is one of the questions that the Corinthians, asked them, what if we're not sure? He said, well, there are places where you know for a fact that there are unclean meats, that there are meats there that are sacrificed to idols. So you stay away from those places. But if you're in mixed company and you're not sure, and the goal is to preach the gospel, then you don't ask for conscience sake. Then you consume not unclean meat, but possibly meat that you are not sure if it's sacrificed to an idol or not, for the ignorance of the people who you are, at meat with. He also says that if it becomes a problem, that other members are seeing you eating with people, and now they think, okay, it's okay for me to go into these strange places and eat how I want, where I want, when I want, then abstain. Basically to use wisdom. But the understanding in the text is not absolutely what the translation adheres to. The translation adheres to, the Christian doctrine of the law is done away with in Messiah, right? And so you have a text that says Messiah is the end of the law for righteousness. And of course, the way that reads is that once you have Messiah, the law is ended. Do you see what I'm saying? Or that once Messiah has come, now the law is no more, and now righteousness is through Messiah and not the law. And so this is not the understanding of that passage. The passage actually reads more like this, that Messiah is the goal of the law for righteousness. And that makes a lot more sense. We keep the law to make it to Messiah. We keep the commandments, as the path to attain the understanding of Messiah, to reach the discipleship of Messiah. And that's what we know to be true. But the text will lead you in this direction by its translation. It will use words that make the text appear more antinomian than it actually is. You see what I'm saying? Instead of reconciliation, they'll translate it for it to sound antinomian. And this is a tampering with the text that you have to be aware of when you enter into discussion of the New Testament. You have to keep two verses in mind particularly. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, and then Romans chapter 3, verse 31. Both of those texts and sections you have to be very mindful of when you're reading Paul, or else the doctrine will seem to you antinomian in the way that it's translated. That's the first encoding, that's the first tampering that the Bible has, right? And so the second I'll talk about is, of course, the names in the text. We know that the Bible uses the term Lord. We know that or the Lord, I should say. We know that it also uses the term God, and we know that it uses the term Jesus, and we know it uses the term Christ. None of these words are words which are appropriate to describe the Messiah with. Not even Christ. Do you see what I mean? These are inappropriate words to describe the reality of our salvation and our Father. Because he has a name, and his name is specific in the text, and it specifically states in the text that those who are saved will call upon his name. Right? There's one name given among men under heaven whereby we must be saved, right? Given among men under heaven. Do you see what I'm saying? In Acts chapter 4, verse 12. So we know that the text tampered, the translators of the text tampered with this understanding and removed the name of the Father from the Old Testament and the New Testament, removed the name about 7,000 times. Do you hear me? Because that is extremely substantial, that the name of the Father was removed from the text 7,000 times. And if you're familiar with this channel, you'll know that the translation that we use for the name of the Father is Yah Elohim, right? We don't use the term the Lord because you'll see it in the text as the small caps, right, where the whole word is written in capital letters. This is a placeholder for the tetragrammaton, which is Wohod, which is Yod Ho Wahed, right? And we understand it as Yah-O, Elohim Yisrael. We also see the term God being used. And in the text, God is literally the name of a pagan deity, right? The term God is the name of a pagan deity. And that pagan deity is found in Isaiah chapter 65. I believe it's chapter 65, when Isaiah is pronouncing judgment against the Israelites. They're worshiping these particular false deities, setting up a table to these false deities, and making a plate for what the King James version. Shalom, Mishpatah. We got one person out here. What the King James version translates in Isaiah 65 as that truth and that number. In reality, those are two pagan deities. One's name is Mani, and that one's the one that is that number, but that truth is the pagan deity God. And I believe it's 65:17, but you'll have to go and double check me on that, but I'm sure it's chapter 65 in Isaiah. You look it up and it says that those of you who worship will set a table for that truth, and those of you that poured out a drink offering for that number. And again, this is a tricky translation to hide the fact that one of these deities that the ancient Israelites were worshiping, one of these false deities, one of these demons, because we know that the deities from other religions are actually fallen angels and demons. One of those demons' name was God, right? And that means that the term God that everybody uses is actually the name of a demon, actually the name of a false deity. And it means luck. The God of luck's name is God. And when we call on God, we are actually calling on that pagan deity whose attribute is luck, which means that, when we call on God, we're literally calling out the luck, right? And so sometimes, you can get lucky calling on God. So do you see what I'm saying? So you're not actually accessing the energy of Elohim. You're accessing the worldly power of coincidence, right? And sometimes by coincidence, your prayers can seem to be answered, but in reality, if you're not keeping the law, according to Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, it says, haven't we, cast out spirits and cast out demons, and done many wonderful works in your name? He says, and Yahweh shall return and say, I never knew thee. Depart from me, those who work iniquity, that is anomos, that is lawlessness, right? So we know from the text directly that lawlessness is not something that we should adhere to. And one of the things that the law says, specifically in the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, the third commandment is, "Thou shalt not take the name of Yahweh, thy Elohim, in vain." And that word "vain" is "sure" or "sure." And it's literally to be lifted up to nothing, to be brought to nothingness. And this is exactly what the King James translation does. It takes the name of the Father out of the text 7,000 times, which is literally a breaking of the third command, bringing the Father's name to nothingness. So much so that now people call on the Lord instead of Yahweh, instead of the name of the Father, which could be any Lord. We know from 1 Corinthians chapter 8, where Paul says, we know that there are lords many and gods many. So when we call on the name of the Lord, if we say we're calling on the name of the Lord, calling on the name of the Lord, you have to know what his actual name is in order for these things to work. We know the scripture in Proverbs, what is his name? What is his son's name? If you can tell. I believe that Proverbs 29, it's either 27 or 29. I think it's 29. It says, what is his name? What is his son's name? If you can tell. And that addition afterwards, that if you can tell, is important because in this era right now, because of the King James translation, we cannot tell, right? Some of us can, but you have to do the additional steps of research. You have to decode the scriptures in order for it to work properly. So that means that everywhere you see the Lord in the Old Testament in those caps is an instance when Yahweh's name is being used. And every time you see God is an instance where the term Elohim is used. So these are the two terms that you must replace in the King James Bible in order to decode it. Those two terms, Lord and God. Also, you have to, in the New Testament, replace the term Jesus, because that term Jesus in the Bible, in the actual text, in the ancient text, does not exist. You guys, there are no such thing as translation for a name. You cannot use a translation for a name. You must use a transliteration. You must adhere to what the name sounds like. If there's only one name given among men under heaven whereby we must be saved, according to Acts chapter 4, verse 12, then we have to do the research and the study as to what that name actually is. We know by Hebrews chapter 4 and Acts chapter 7 that the name Joshua is identical to the name of the Messiah because of the way So the last way that the Bible is tampered with is, and we will also get to why Elohim allows it to be tampered with. But I just tell you the three ways that the Bible is tampered with. And then also, I don't want you to look at this as like a means or a way to judge what the Bible says, because these are still, the King James Bible is still the best and most accurate translation of the Bible, even with these three things that you must decode in the text. It's still the very best translation of the Bible. So this last way that it must be decoded is according to white supremacy. We understand that the terms fair, that the term white in the Bible all have indication of brown skin, or at least not white skin. Do you see what I'm saying? The term fair is the Hebrew term yafah, right? And so when we think of the term fair, the modern term means fair skin, which means light or white skin. This was an intentional addition to the text because King James is literally the one who is responsible for the very first slave ship touching down at Jamestown in Virginia in 1619. It's literally King James Town in Virginia. So this means that King James is aware that the slaves being brought into the very newly founded or the very newly found American continent were the Hebrews of the Bible, are the Hebrews of the Bible, because he's very familiar with the text, and he's hired all these translators in order for that to remain hidden. But he's using the translation as a means to hide what he's doing with the Hebrews in the newly found America. That the plan for the Hebrews in America is to brainwash and captivate them, or hold them captive in America in order to have an everlasting slave class to build this new nation up, right? So this is the plan, literally, that King James initiated, and it's twofold. It's taking the Hebrews captive and bringing them into a land that is outside of the sphere of European understanding, way, way, way to the west, so that he can do really and write really what he wants about history. And then the second wave of this plan is to introduce a white supremacist version Bible, which eliminates color from the Hebrews of the Bible, and then in essence, hiding their identity in the text and in reality for all the people that were coming forward after this King James Bible. So again, the three words that were used is the word yafah, which means beautiful, but it doesn't mean fair. The Bible translates it as fair, which we know has the connotation for light skin. The second word is ruddy, which people have used to mean redness of the cheeks, like a white person would be blushing. We know that is the term for that is the term admane, which means red skin, and we know red is in the red heifer. That's the same word they use for the red heifer, and if you see what a red heifer looks like, then the red heifer is brown. It's a deep colored brown, which is, if you look at our complexion, we look like red heifers out here. I mean, you can even look at my skin right now. It's looking like a red heifer out here, and I live in Africa. We are in the sun right now. This is about as brown as I'm going to get, and this is about the color of a red heifer right here. And then the last word that they use is the word for white. And I cannot remember the term that they use for this word white in the Hebrew, but if you look at it, there's two words. There's one Laban, and then there's another one, which means shining or shimmering. And anytime they're using skin color, they use this word that they translated as white, but actually means shiny, actually means shimmering, which, is a clear, indication of falsehood. trying to unnaturally connect European people to the text by using this term white, right? And then later on, uh, describing your own people as being white skinned. Do you see what I'm saying? So with this in mind, we have to decode the Bible for white supremacy, because in the text, King James specifically added white supremacy in the text as one part of this twofold mission to both uh, enslave and capture the Hebrew slaves in Jamestown, which is King Jamestown, Virginia, America, thousands of miles away from Europe, and then introduce this concept of white Hebrews with the white supremacist version of the Bible. Do you see what I'm saying? The version that takes out the terms of blackness and inserts the terms of whiteness. There are several places in the Bible where they cannot help but use the term black. One of which is in Song of Solomon, and I believe it's used there twice. So in order to understand, you have to insert these concepts into the scripture, into the King James Bible, because they are not naturally there. They have been taken out of the original text and replaced with wording, with a translation that promotes white supremacy in the text, white Israelites, and not blackness. Do you see what I'm saying? And so these are the three ways that the Bible must be decoded. You have to decode the Bible in terms of keeping the law, which we use Romans 3:31 and Matthew 5:17 through 19, in order to understand that keeping the law is what is prescribed by the text. We also, the Bible is also encoded by the names that are used, and we understand that by, of course, Acts chapter 4, verse 12, and then also the third commandment in Exodus 20, thou shalt not bring the name of Yahweh thy Elohim to nothingness. This is what that commandment means. And this is what the Bible actually, the King James Version of the Bible does. And so we then decode the Bible by inserting the correct name, which is Yah and Yahusha. And then the last way is white supremacy, which we decode by understanding, like we know, according to Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, that the Hebrews are the black Americans, the ones who suffer in these curses, and the ones who the Bible describes in so many ways as being black. In Exodus chapter 2, in Romans chapter 21, where Moses and Paul, you got 1,500 years of history between the two. Both of them are confused for being Egyptians. And if you look at the on the walls and the pyramids and the structures in Egypt, the Egyptians are black-skinned people. And if you know Tacitus, who was a first-century Roman historian, he describes the Egyptians as the Ethiopians, as the Hebrews, all one style of people group, meaning that the Hebrews are black. These are the three ways that the Bible must be decoded in order to fully understand and to know and keep the word. So now the question comes, why in the world would Elohim allow these things to happen? Well, I believe the answer is that Elohim, and the real, true, and living answer is, I don't know why he allowed this to happen. But I do know from history that he did allow it to happen. The understanding that we should take from it is that the world is the world, and the world will attempt to corrupt and to spoil, the understanding of the text. And because the Bible is still the most published, most purchased, and most prophetic book of all time in the 1,500 years that it's been active as a book, or the 2,000 years that it's been active as a book, it's been the most accurate book, even with these changes, of all time. Do you see what I'm saying? So the understanding is that because the devil controls the world, we know in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, It says that the men of this world are blinded by the God of this world. And that God, we know, is the adversary. So even with that, we know that the adversary relies on the prophecy as well. I'll be out there with you guys in a minute. That's a small crowd. That the Bible relies on that the adversary relies on the prophecies in the Bible in order to know what's happening next. So he cannot just change the text in ways that erase the prophecy out, because the prophecy is what he is also using to manipulate the future. Do you see what I'm saying? To manipulate the societies in the future. He cannot change the word so that the word is indecipherable to people, because he himself needs to use it. This is one way that the Bible has been, the information in the Bible has been preserved, because the prophecies coming to pass, everyone is waiting on. Angels are waiting on these prophecies too. So in order for them to be still useful to the devil and the devil's representatives on earth, they have to have access to it. The only way that they would be able to change the Bible in a way that they would still be able to use it for their own good is by changing the characters, changing the identity of the characters, changing the names of the people that are indicated for worship, and then also changing the indications for worship by translating the text in a strange way. You guys recognize, shalom, shalom. It says, this is what I've been wanting to know about. I have to, however, pick this on a rewatch. As I think about this topic, maybe the Father is making us depend on his Spirit. We are to worship him and know by spirit and truth. This is absolutely the case. Y'all go on back over there. Go on back over there. Y'all can come over here in a minute. It's finished. And I can watch y'all. Go on back over there. Go on right now. Let's go. Let's go. Because everyone don't need to be coming over here. So to just catch you up really quick, the answer is why Elohim would allow his words to be tampered with. The real answer is I don't know. But we see that it has been, and then we also see that even with it being tampered with, it's still the most accurate prophetic piece of writing in all of history. That with the tampering is done in such a way that the prophecy is not affected. Do you see what I'm saying? If the devil has to choose a group of people to be the anti-Israelites, which we know that he did, to be the anti-Messiah, then they too rely upon the prophecies in the text in order to gain their power. Do you see what I'm saying? The Ashkenazim of today are literally using true prophecies to fulfill false prophecies. Does that make sense? They did their Aliyah in 1948 and established the state of Israel because the prophecy of the Israelites returning to Israel is in the Bible. We know they are not the real Israelites, but the world doesn't know that because we've been given this false identity and this white supremacy in the text so that they could come along and usurp the inheritance. And so in order for them to usurp the inheritance, the concept of the inheritance still has to be there. So the devil actually is, the onus is on him to preserve the text well enough for him to be able to align the prophecy with a different group of people. Do you see what I'm saying? And that actually, in the future, may work for our benefit, because there are things that are going into place right now, like anti-Semitism, like laws that have to do with Israel having the right to return, laws that enable Israelites to have land in Israel. And even right now, this war that's going on in Gaza is literally clearing Israel out in just the weirdest and the most graphic way possible, for in the future, for it to be ready for us to be there. Do you see what I'm saying? But one thing that my wife pointed out in a discussion that we had a little while, is that once these laws are on the books, these laws are going to stick, right? If they're putting anti-Semitism laws on record, and then they find out that they're not Semites, or the world finds out that they're not Semites, and find out that we are, then these anti-Semitism laws are for our benefit in the future. That these right to return laws, that these Aliyah laws that are being put in place for quote unquote Ashkenazi Israel will apply to us in the future. Because in the future, everyone will know who the actual Israelites are. So the corruption that is in the Bible, right now, is used to literally use a class of people to come through, and possibly could be the case, to come through and to wipe out any remnant of any other thing out of the place in order for it to be cleansed by the time we get there. Does that make sense? You can't have a false prophet, come into position and have any say using false prophecy. He has to use real prophecy. And in order for him to use real prophecy, the real prophecy has to not be tampered with. What is tampered with prophecy is who the people are. You see what I'm saying? The prophecy is not tampered with. It's the identities that are tampered with. In this way, the Bible maintains its prophetic superiority, but then that superiority is redirected towards a false group of people. This is the way that you corrupt the text, preserve it at the same time. And this is what we see happening. So we don't know why literally Elohim did this, but we can see that the ways that it is tempered with are ways that require that extra step for you to go and understand. Just like Yahusha spoke in parables so that some people would not be converted and their souls be saved, these extra steps in the text right now are required for the reader to go and do their own research. You must, in these days, in this time, you must study to show yourself approved. Like Paul told Timothy, you must study to show yourself approved. Because that extra step is the difference right now between life and death. Because if you find yourself following the Ashkenazim, you're going to die, because they're going to teach you against Messiah. They're going to teach you all of their false ways, and you're going to be following these false people into destruction, right? If you don't know the name you're calling on, if you're calling on the Lord or God, these are names that are false names that don't carry with them the power of Yah Elohim. It says that in that day, whoever calls on the name of Yah Elohim shall be saved. We know that to be the case. And then if you don't follow the commandments, if you're confused by the translations in Paul about how to worship, then again, this is also a very, very important point for you to focus on, because now okay, the text is leaning in this direction, so you can't focus on anything outside of keeping the testimony. You see what I'm saying? Having the testimony of Yahusha and keeping the commandments. If you keep those things in mind, then in the text you're good. It's only in this era, in the past 500 years, where we had to do this. So in this era, the Bible is coded in these ways. The Bible is hidden in these ways. And the decipher of it is simple to do. The information is readily available to do. And it even adds an element of truth to the text, because we see the need to decode it in these ways, to usurp the authority that it holds, right? If you're trying to take away the power from the text, but you need the power of the text, the way to do that is to make people believe that it's a different group of people, make people call on a different name, and make people worship in a different way. And that's how we see the Bible needs to be decoded in order for it to, to be this truth, worshiping in spirit and truth, like it says in John chapter 4. So, Elohim allowed it to be coded And again, we don't know exactly why, but what happens, what the conclusion of the matter is that you must study because you can see the true prophecies and you can see the falseness of the society around it. And that's what we're overlooking. That's what we are going beyond is the false society to get to the trueness of the text, right? All right, it says, the audio is a bit muffled and a bit hard to decipher. I assume they are recording using the JBL headset mic. Just a heads up before you go too long. Oh yeah, man, I've already been on here 4 hours, so I hope it's not too muffled because at the beginning of this one, I did say if it is muffled, that I would go back and redo this video without it being muffled. And we are out here on the beach, so it may be just the waves coming through. But I will, if I go back, I did a test video at first to make sure that it wouldn't come in absolutely low, but it wasn't on live. And I know live, the audio on live is sometimes different from the audio directly in the phone. So I almost just did it directly on, and when I listened to the playback, it sounded clear. So I just assumed that the live was going to be okay. But if it turns out that this one is not going to be any good, then I will go ahead and go back and redo it without the headphones and in a more calm place so that you guys can get this information. But I appreciate you guys for swinging through. And I will go ahead and close it out now, especially if nobody can hear me, because I can and do this over again. But if you can hear it, I recommend going back and listening to it. I went over, what we talked about before and the other day, the 3 ways that the Bible needs to be decoded. And then at the end, kind of an explanation as to why these things are there and why Elohim would allow them to be there. Of course, we only know the will of Elohim by what he does and what we can see him doing and what he tells us that he's going to do. So again, the sanctity of the text, I don't believe is corrupted. It's the application that's corrupted. And the application can be restored very easily by doing the extra steps to figure these things out. And if you know where these things are that you need to pay close attention to, then you can't go wrong. And it's 3 things: the name, the law, and white supremacy. You gotta overcome all those things, right? You have to overcome the names in the text. You have to find what they are. You have to overcome the antinomianism that it seems the text is pointing to in order to keep the law. And then you have to know that the Hebrews are black in order to know who it is whose skirt that you need to be pulling on at the end of the world. And if you are one of those Hebrews, that now is the time to study and dig into text to maintain and to grab back hold of that ancient heritage that your fathers rejected. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, you guys. Peace and blessings. I really appreciate you guys coming out. I always appreciate you guys. I'm running the trade. You're always on here. I appreciate you coming through. But if I'll go back and listen to this again, and if it is muffled and you can't hear clearly what I'm saying, I'll just do it again. So you guys, if there's no questions or anything like that, shalom, shalom. Peace and blessings to you all.